In the deep, shielded mine shafts, the survivors of Terra Nova felt the planet shudder. The vibration was not a shaking, but a deep, sorrowful groan, as if the world itself was in pain. Then, silence. For 3 days, Ilara Vance and the 10,000 survivors huddled in the dark, listening to the crackle of their radiation counters. The surface was uninhabitable, bathed in exotic particles and hard radiation from the planet's now unstable core. They had won. They were alive. And they were trapped on a dead world that had been their tomb, their weapon, and their savior. Ilara sat in the darkness, the weight of her father's sacrifice and her own victory settling on her like a shroud. She was a manager without anything left to manage, a leader of survivors on a ghost planet. But General Marcus Vance's final act was not just firing the weapon. His sacrifice had a purpose beyond the battle. The Chimera weapon's final pulse, the one that had cost him his life, was not just an attack. It was a broadcast. A black box signal launched at FTL speeds, piggybacking on the resonance wave itself. It was sent not just to Earth, but to every known inhabited sector of the galaxy. The broadcast contained everything. The sensor logs from the Iron Will's first unprovoked attack, the audio of Warlord Hakar's arrogant declaration, the high-definition footage of Hakar striking down a broken old man, the medical logs of Marcus's injuries, the footage of Grak executing colonists, and then the final chilling recording, the schematic of the stellar resonance cascade, a complete, detailed, step-by-step scientific explanation of the energy frequency and the physics behind how to unmake a Kragor FTL drive. The galaxy, which had lived in cowering terror of the Alpha Kragor for centuries, received the message. And the galaxy was stunned into silence. For the first time, the Betas and Omegas saw their oppressors not just defeated, but analyzed. Humanity hadn't just won a war. They had solved an equation. They had taken the Kragor's greatest strength, their technological uniformity, and turned it into a fatal species-ending vulnerability. The effect was instantaneous. On a dozen subjugated worlds, enslaved species who had been forced to build Kragor technology realized they had been building their own keys. The Kragor hegemony, its primary extermination fleet gone, its warlords dead, tried to regroup. They sent ships to punish the new uprisings. But the Omegas were ready. A small, scrappy species of reptilian miners, armed with the human data, retuned their own deep-core drilling lasers. When a Kragor cruiser arrived, they fired. The cruiser vanished. In the Xylos system, a peaceful race of silicon-based life forms who communicated in pure mathematics simply broadcast the resonance note on a tight beam frequency. The Kragor patrol fleet sent to pacify them tore itself apart. The Kragor's reign of terror, built on a singular alpha philosophy, was brittle. It could not adapt. It could not change. Faced with a galaxy that now knew their secret, a galaxy that was no longer afraid, the Kragor hegemony did not just fall. It evaporated. Their ships, once symbols of terror, became flying coffins waiting for any species with the human key to turn it. The Alphas, a species defined by their presence, were now defined by their absence. They were erased, not by a single human act, but by a single human idea. 3 months later, a new fleet arrived in orbit of the dead world of Terra Nova. It was the Earth Defense Force, a massive rescue armada. They had received the broadcast. They had come for their people. Ilara Vance, thin and pale but alive, was the first to be brought aboard the flagship. She was no longer a clerk. She was a legend. The final resolution came a month after that, at the Galactic Concordat, a vast assembly of all known species. Humanity, once considered too young and too chaotic to be invited, was now at the center stage. The seat that had, for 500 years, been held by the Kragor hegemony was empty. No one spoke of them. No one mourned them. It was as if they had never existed. The new delegate for the Kragor sector was Ilara Vance. She walked to the podium, a small, soft-skinned mammal in a simple black uniform. The delegates of 1,000 worlds, beings of crystal, of gas, of energy, watched her. They saw the species that had been labeled Omega. They saw the species that had clinically, methodically, and absolutely erased the alphas from existence. They did not see an alpha in her place. They saw something far more terrifying. They saw a manager, a cooperator, a pack leader, and they looked at humanity with a new, profound, and terrified respect. The galaxy had learned its lesson. There are no alphas and omegas. There are only survivors, and humanity, it seemed, was the best survivor of them all. The victory in the plaza was absolute, but Ilara Vance knew it was not an ending. It was a trigger. The Kragor hegemony was an empire. An alpha that is challenged and beaten does not retreat. It returns with overwhelming, annihilating force. The Iron Will was just a dreadnought. The Kragor possessed armadas. Terra Nova's rudimentary communications array, now back online, picked up the echoes of a massive fleet mobilizing from the Kragor core worlds. It wasn't a punitive fleet. It was an extermination fleet. They would not land this time. They would boil the oceans and crack the planet's crust from orbit. The colony of 300,000 souls had, at most, 1 week. Panic, for the first time, began to set in. The colonists had won an impossible ground battle, but they were defenseless against a fleet. They had no ships, no orbital cannons. They were trapped. Ilara found herself in the city's command bunker, the one her father had insisted be built. Surrounded by her new command staff, the chief engineer, the head of mining operations, and Dr. Eris. "We can't run. We can't fight, Ben," the engineer said, his voice flat with despair. "It's over." "No," a quiet voice said from the corner. General Marcus Vance was sitting up in a medical wheelchair, his body a ruin of casts and bandages, but his eyes were sharp. "It's not over, Ilara. You've been a brilliant manager. But you've been managing a colony. You haven't been managing the project." Ilara stared at him. "Project? What project? This is a colony, Dad." "No," Marcus said, his voice heavy with a secret he had carried for years. "It's not. Terra Nova was never just a colony, Ilara. Why do you think Earth Command sent its best administrator and one of its retired broken generals to the most distant planet in its territory? Terra Nova is a trap. It's Project Chimera." He wheeled himself to a locked console in the back of the bunker, one Ilara had always assumed was for deep space communications. He pressed his palm to it. It chimed, and a new hidden section of the bunker lit up. A massive holographic display flickered to life, showing not the colony, but the planet's core. Terra Nova was chosen for its unique geological instability, Marcus explained, his voice taking on the old, cold tone of a general. Specifically, its massive liquid-state exotic matter core. The colony's main power reactor. "It's not just a power plant, Ilara. It's a detonator." Ilara felt her blood run cold. A bomb? You built a bomb under us?" "Not a bomb," Marcus said. "Something cleaner and far more terrible. It's a stellar resonance cascade. A weapon based on a theory that, well, we prayed we'd never have to test it. It's designed to emit a single focused wave of exotic particles, tuned to a specific energy frequency. It's not an explosion. It's a note." "A note?" Ben asked, confused. "A single, perfect, resonant note," Marcus said. "Like a singer hitting a frequency that can shatter a wine glass. Our intelligence believed that all Kragor technology, especially their FTL drives and their ship shielding, was based on a single specific null point energy principle. If we hit their ships with a perfectly tuned resonance wave based on that same principle, their drives won't just fail. They will implode. Their shields won't just drop. They will invert. The wave should, in theory, unmake them, pulling their ships inside out into hyperspace." "Erase them," Ilara whispered, finally understanding the chilling title of the project. "But there's a cost," Marcus said, his face grim. "The weapon can only be fired once. The feedback from the planet's core will be catastrophic. It will shatter the colony's infrastructure. It will vent the core's radiation to the surface. It will make Terra Nova uninhabitable. And it has to be aimed manually. The resonance wave is unstable. Someone has to be at the controls in this bunker, keeping the particle stream focused on the fleet until the last ship is gone. The feedback will be unsurvivable for anyone in this room." Silence fell. This was the sacrifice. They could save themselves, but their world would die, and one of them would have to die with it. Days later, The sky tore open. Not one Krager ship, but 50. A fleet of black iron monsters, led by a ship twice the size of the Iron Will, the flagship of the Kragor Grand Armada, the Alpha's Tooth. Its commander, Warlord Krell, a legend of brutality, broadcast on all channels. We are here, not for your obedience, but for your dust. The Alpha of Alphas has passed judgment. You will be an example to the galaxy. The fleet began to deploy, forming an orbital ring of death. In the bunker, Elara looked at her father. Her eyes were filled with tears. "You did this," she whispered. "You brought me here to die." "I brought you here," Marcus said gently, "because I knew you were the only one smart enough to win the ground war. I knew you could manage the pack. My job was to manage the end game." He wheeled himself to the firing console. "Get your people to the deep-level mine shafts. They're shielded. They'll survive the radiation. Ben, you know the way. Dr. Aris, take the medical supplies. Elara, go with them." "No," Elara said, her voice shaking. "No, I'm not leaving you." "Yes, you are," Marcus said, his voice a general's command. "This isn't a choice. I am a broken old man. You are the woman who brought the Alphas to their knees. Humanity will need you. They need to know what you did. How you did it." He pulled her close, his one good arm holding her tight. "They are Alphas. They are predators. But we are human. We are a family. And we protect our own." He pushed her away. "Go." "That is an order, Administrator Vance." Elara, weeping, was pulled away by Ben. She looked back one last time as the blast doors began to seal. Her father sat at the console, his back straight, a soldier at his post. Warlord Krell gave the order. "Fire. Erase their cities." The plasma lances began to glow. "Not today," Marcus Vance whispered. His hand, old and shaking, slammed down on the activation stud. Deep beneath the planet, the reactor went critical. But it did not explode. Instead, the ground of the entire planet began to sing. A low, terrible, harmonic vibration. A single, pure, invisible beam of energy lanced up from the planet's poles, refracting through the ionosphere and striking the Kragor fleet aboard the Alpha's Tooth. Warlord Krell looked at his sensors in confusion. There was no energy reading, no weapon, just a sound. Then his primary shield generator flickered, inverted, and crushed the side of his bridge. His FTL drive in the heart of his ship suddenly became a micro-black hole. The Alpha's Tooth did not explode. It simply folded in on itself, vanishing in a pinch of silent light, and across the entire fleet of 50 ships, the same thing happened. One by one, like lights being snuffed out, the Kragor FTL drives imploded, erasing them from existence. In 30 seconds, the entire armada, the pride of the Alpha species, was gone. The sky was empty. Down in the bunker, the feedback wave hit. The holographic display shattered. The walls cracked. Marcus Vance looked at a small, framed picture of Elara on his console. He smiled as the very atoms of the bunker were unmade. His sacrifice was complete. Warlord Hakar's dreadnought, the Iron Will, tore back into Terra Nova's orbit. He was incandescent with rage. Sub-Warlord Grax's panicked reports had spoken of a collective paralysis, of a complete halt in production. Hakar saw it as the ultimate failing of a subordinate. He had returned not just to punish the Omegas, but to relieve Grax of his command, and likely his life. He landed in the central plaza, his ship's engines scorching the pavement, a display of raw, impatient power. He strode down the ramp, his forearms tense, his heavy plasma cannon unslung and held at the ready. He found Grax in the plaza, surrounded by his garrison, who were in turn surrounded by a silent, standing ocean of human colonists. "You have failed," Hakar snarled at Grax, not bothering to lower his voice. "You have let these things defy you." "Warlord, they do not fight," Grax protested, his voice a desperate rumble. "They just stop. It is a madness. We cannot—" "You cannot," Hakar interrupted, his voice dropping to a lethal hiss. He raised his cannon, not at the humans, but at Grax. "The penalty for failure is erasure." He fired. Grax's carapaced body was enveloped in blue plasma, and he was gone. Hakar turned his smoking weapon toward the silent human crowd. The lesson is over. I gave you a chance to serve. You have chosen extermination. We will begin with the one who thinks she is in command." He pointed his cannon toward the hospital, where he knew the clerk Ilara Vance was hiding, and where her broken father lay. "Bring her to me, and the broken Alpha. They will be the first to be unmade." His warriors, re-energized by his presence and the execution of their failed commander, moved as one. They smashed their way into the hospital, the sounds of destruction echoing across the silent plaza. The humans did not move. They just watched, their faces pale, their eyes cold. A few minutes later, the warriors returned, dragging Ilara by her arm and carrying the unconscious form of Marcus Vance, who was still attached to life support monitors. Hakkar grinned, a terrible sight of tusks and plated gums. He had Ilara thrown to her knees beside her father's gurney. "You are the Alpha of this pathetic resistance," Hakkar mocked. "You, a small clerk. You taught them to be silent. I will teach them how to scream." He aimed his cannon at Marcus's head. "You will watch your broken sire be erased. Then you will follow." Ilara looked up, her face bruised and dirty, but her eyes were not filled with the terror Hakkar expected. They were filled with a cold, calculating calm. "You're right," she said, her voice clear and carrying in the silence. "I am a clerk. I manage things. And I've managed this too." "What?" Hakkar began, a flicker of confusion in his mind. "Now," Ilara said, not to him, but to the empty air, and the world exploded. It was not a bomb. It was a tactic. Hakkar had made the second fatal mistake of the Kragor. He believed a battle must be a glorious head-on collision of strength. He had gathered his entire garrison, his honor guard, and himself, all in one small, open plaza. He had not checked the rooftops. He had not scanned the sewers. He had not considered the environment. From every rooftop surrounding the plaza, massive, repurposed sonic drills, the kind used for boring through bedrock, swiveled and fired. They did not fire projectiles. They fired focused, high-frequency sound waves. The Kragor, a species evolved as apex hunters, had hearing far more sensitive than humans. To them, the sound was not a noise. It was a physical blow. It was a wave of pure, agonizing pain that shattered their inner ears and bypassed their armor completely. Hakkar roared, dropping his cannon, his four hands instinctively flying to his head. His elite warriors crumpled, their carapaces vibrating, their nervous systems overloaded, but Ilara was not finished. The sound was just the distraction. "Now," she said again. From the grates in the plaza, a thick white fog began to spray upwards. It was not poison. It was fertilizer, a high-nitrate chemical compound, harmless to humans. But Ilara's clerk work had included reading the atmospheric and biological reports. She knew the Kragor biology, with its copper-based blood and silicate carapace, was hyper-reactive to high concentrations of nitrates. For them, the fog was not a fog. It was acid. It began to eat into the seams of their armor, to burn their skin, to sear their lungs. The Kragor were now blind, deafened, and in agony. They fired their weapons randomly, their famous alpha discipline completely shattered. They were a mob of panicked, wounded animals. And then the Omegas moved. From every alley, every doorway, every sewer entrance, the colonists swarmed. The soft-skinned prey. They were not carrying rifles. They were carrying tools. Engineers with high-powered plasma cutters. Miners with percussion hammers. Medics with high-pressure injectors filled with sedatives. They did not fight the Kragor. They disassembled them. They ignored the flailing limbs and cut through their armor. They hammered joints until they broke. They injected fatal overdoses directly into their exposed flesh. It was not a battle. It was a harvest. It was the cowardly, cooperative, and utterly brutal efficiency of a pack bringing down a target. Warlord Hakkar, his senses screaming, his armor corroding, watched in disbelief as his elite guard, the finest warriors in the galaxy, were being systematically slaughtered by farmers. He saw Ilara Vance, the clerk, standing calmly beside her father's gurney, a data slate in her hand, calmly directing the extermination with hand signals. She was pointing at squads of Kragor, and teams of humans would move in to efficiently dispose of them. He finally understood. This was not chaos. This was management. He raised his head and roared, a final act of defiance. He would kill the clerk, even if it cost him his life. He charged, ignoring the pain, ignoring the fog. He raised his massive clawed hand to bring it down on her head. His hand was suddenly vaporized at the wrist. He stared, confused. General Marcus Vance, his eyes open, weak but blazing with a cold fire, was holding a heavy plasma pistol he had pulled from under his gurney's blanket. "Get away from my daughter," Marcus rasped. Hakkar stared at the broken Alpha who had just maimed him. The shock was too much. The pain, the humiliation, the sheer impossibility of it all. He didn't even see the mining crew that swarmed him from behind. He only felt the plasma cutters finding the seams in his backplate. The last thing Warlord Hakkar ever saw was Ilara Vance looking down at him, her expression not one of hatred, but of simple, cold, administrative finality, as if she were closing an account. The reign of the Alphas on Terra Nova was over. Warlord Hakkar, profoundly bored by the entire affair on Terra Nova, left a garrison of 100 Kragor warriors under the command of Sub-Warlord Grak. It was a token force, more than enough to manage a planet of a few 100,000 soft-skinned Omegas. Hakkar took his dreadnought and moved on, seeking a real challenge, leaving Grak to manage the tithes. Grak was a typical Kragor, a brute of enormous size and limited imagination. He saw his posting on this quiet, boring colony as an insult. He was a warrior, meant to crush, not to manage. He established his command post in the city hall, the very building where Ilara Vance had once managed water disputes. He relished the irony, throwing her meticulously organized data slates to the floor, replacing her maps with Kragor banners, which were mostly just dried skins of conquered foes. His first order was simple. All human colonists were to work triple shifts in the palladium mines. The tithe Hakkar had demanded would be met, and he would use the Omega's own bodies to break them. He expected compliance, born of the terror his warlord had instilled. What he got was something he could not possibly understand. He got malicious compliance. Ilara Vance, now the acting head of the human population, was the very picture of cooperation. She broadcast a message to the colonists, her voice calm and steady, urging them to obey their new masters for the sake of their own survival. The Kragor, listening in, heard only the capitulation of a frightened Omega. They missed the true message. They did not see the subtle flicker of her eyes, a coded signal. They did not understand the human capacity for subtext. The mining operations began, and for the first week everything seemed to be going as Grak planned. The human workers were quiet, submissive, and they worked. The ore quotas were being met. But then, things started to go wrong. Small, annoying, inexplicable things. A key or conveyor belt, one that transported tons of raw material, suddenly snapped. The human engineer on duty, a man named Ben, explained with a perfectly straight, terrified face that the belt's tension sensors must have failed. It would take 2 days to repair. Grak, enraged, had the engineer flogged. The next day, 2 of the Kragor's heavy-lift transports used to shuttle the refined ore suffered catastrophic engine failures. The human mechanics swore they had been fueled, but the tanks were dry. Someone, it seemed, had misfiled the refueling requisitions. In the mess hall, the Kragor warriors began to get sick. It was nothing lethal, just a severe, debilitating digestive distress. The human cooks, weeping and apologetic, explained that the Kragor's biology was still new to them. They must have prepared the food incorrectly. Grak, bellowing in rage, executed one of the cooks. The next day, the entire planet's water purification system went offline. The human technicians, with deep, profound apologies, reported that a central logic board had simply fried. It was old equipment. They explained, unreliable. It would take a week to fabricate a replacement. The Kragor, whose biology was not adapted to Terra Nova's native microbes, were now without a clean water supply. Sub-Warlord Grak was trapped in a nightmare of incompetence. He was a warrior. He understood a direct challenge. He knew how to meet a charge, how to break a shield wall, how to snap a spine. He did not know how to fight paperwork. He did not understand how to combat errors. Every human he interrogated, every worker he threatened, was a picture of terrified, apologetic submission. They were so sorry. They were trying their best. They were just weak. and stupid and disorganized. It perfectly confirmed his Omega theory, and it was driving him insane. His garrison was now suffering from food poisoning, his equipment was failing, and his ore quotas were collapsing. He could not prove a single act of sabotage. It was death by 1,000 paper cuts, administered by a clerk. Elara Vance, from a hidden communications hub in the sublevels of the hospital where her father still lay in a coma, was coordinating it all. She was using the very administrative skills Hakkar had mocked. She had access to every system on the planet: power grids, water, air filtration, scheduling. She was a ghost in the machine she herself had built. She wasn't leading a rebellion. She was managing a systemic failure. She identified the most brittle parts of the Kragor's occupation: their reliance on human infrastructure, their arrogance, their utter lack of curiosity about the inferior technology they were using. And she was applying pressure. One tiny, deniable piece at a time, Grak, in his fury, decided he needed to re-establish dominance in the only way he knew how. He needed to break their spirit, not just their bodies. He seized a dozen colonists at random from the streets, including Ben, the engineer whose conveyor belt had broken. He dragged them to the central plaza, to the very spot where Marcus Vance had been struck down. He announced to the colony that for every future failure, for every mistake, an Omega would be publicly erased. He raised his heavy plasma rifle, pointed it at Ben, and fired. Ben's wife screamed, but the rest of the colony did not. Grak had expected wailing, pleading, a satisfying wave of terror. Instead, a deep, profound, and unnatural silence fell over the entire city. It was not the silence of fear. It was the silence of a held breath. It was the silence of a collective decision being made. Every human worker in the mines, in the cafeterias, in the control rooms simply stopped. They put down their tools. They turned off their terminals. They stood up from their tables. They did not riot. They did not protest. They simply ceased. In the control room of the power grid, a young woman named Anya looked at the Kragor guard who was screaming at her to keep working. She just shook her head, a single silent tear rolling down her cheek. The guard raised his rifle, but he hesitated. His orders were to manage the workers, not kill them all. If he killed this one, the entire grid would go dark. And the grid, he knew, also powered the air scrubbers in his barracks. All across Terra Nova, the human Omegas had, in perfect silent coordination, stopped. The tithe was no longer being mismanaged. It had ceased to exist. Elara, from her bunker, watched the chaos on the security feeds. The Kragor were roaring, striking, threatening, and the humans were just taking it. They were not fighting back. They were, as a species, collectively turning the other cheek, and it was the most aggressive, terrifying act of defiance the Kragor had ever encountered. Grak had tried to break a single Omega, and in response, the entire pack had closed ranks in a way he could not understand. He could not kill them all. He could not force them to work. He was an alpha, the apex predator, and he had been rendered utterly, completely impotent by a species that refused to play by his rules. The resistance had just changed, from subtle sabotage to a quiet, terrifying, and total war of attrition. In the known galaxy, there are hierarchies. There are the builders, the thinkers, the explorers, and the scavengers. And then there were the Kragor. The Kragor hegemony did not build, they did not explore. They took. In their own harsh, guttural language, there was no word for negotiation. There was only dominance and submission. They were 8 foot tall, carapaced titans, a species of four-armed, tusked warriors from a high-gravity world that had forged them into the galaxy's perfect, undisputed predators. They saw all other life as inferior, betas to be broken or omegas to be consumed. They were the alphas of the galaxy, a title they had earned by crushing every species that had dared to even look them in the eye. They had never lost a war, never ceded a single inch of territory. They were an absolute. Then, one day, their long-range scouts found a small, blue-green world and its handful of fledgling colonies, populated by a soft-skinned, small-boned species they found almost laughably weak. A species they immediately labeled Omega. That species was humanity, and in their arrogance, the Kragor had just signed their own death warrant. They had no way of knowing that the species they saw as prey was, in fact, the only species in the universe that had perfected the art of erasing its competition. The first contact was not a greeting. It was an execution, a single Kragor dreadnought, the Iron Will, translated from hyperspace into the high orbit of Terra Nova, humanity's most distant and prosperous colony. The ship was a monster of dark metal, bristling with kinetic cannons and plasma lances, its very presence a violation of the quiet, star-dusted sky. It did not hail. It did not request. It simply acted. Its primary weapon fired once, a searing beam of energy that lanced out and vaporized the colony's single orbital defense platform, a small station manned by 300 souls. The station did not even have time to send a warning. It just vanished. Down on the surface in the colonial capital of Endurance, the planetary administrator, Alara Vance, watched the sky turn white. She was a young woman, brilliant and empathetic, a manager, not a warrior. She was trained to build communities, to solve disputes over water rights and crop rotations. She was not prepared for this. The ground shook as debris from the station began to streak through the atmosphere. Beside her, her father, Marcus Vance, watched the same sky, but his eyes were different. He was a retired general of the Earth Defense Force, a man who had seen humanity's own brutal internal wars. He had come to Terra Nova for peace, to watch his daughter build something new. He looked at the falling debris, and his face, aged and kind, hardened into something Alara had not seen in a decade. "Get to the bunker," he said, his voice a low, cold command. "Now." Before they could move, the Kragor dreadnought descended, its shadow passing over the city like the hand of a dead god. It landed in the central plaza, crushing a monument to peace, its landing struts cracking the very foundations of the city. A ramp hissed open, and the alphas of the galaxy stepped onto human soil for the first time. The being that emerged was Warlord Hakkar. He was magnificent and terrifying, his black and red carapace gleaming, his 4 massive arms crossed over a chest that looked like it was carved from granite. He carried no weapon because he was the weapon. He and his honor guard surveyed the small, terrified crowd of humans that had gathered, their faces pale, their bodies trembling. Hakkar's voice boomed from an external speaker, a deep, grinding sound that was instantly, brutally translated. "You are Omegas. This world, your bodies, your possessions, are now the property of the Kragor hegemony. You will serve, you will obey, or you will be erased. Your alphas will present themselves, so they may be broken and replaced." General Marcus Vance stepped forward, his old EDF uniform jacket hastily thrown on. He was tall for a human, but he was frail and thin compared to the alien titan before him. "I am Marcus Vance," he said, his voice steady. "I am the ranking Alpha. Here." Hakkar let out a sound that might have been a laugh. It was like rocks grinding together. He looked Marcus up and down, his gaze filled with a bottomless biological contempt. He saw gray hair. He saw soft skin. He saw a body that had not proven itself in ritual combat. "This," Hakkar boomed, "is your alpha? A broken, dying male? You are even weaker than our scouts reported." Hakkar's upper left hand moved, a blur of motion. He did not punch Marcus. He backhanded him, a casual, dismissive gesture of dominance. The force was catastrophic. Marcus was thrown 20 feet, crashing into a fountain, his body broken and still. Alara screamed. It was a raw, primal sound of rage and grief. She ran to her father's side, her administrative uniform covered in his blood. The other colonists cried out, some in fear, some in anger. Warlord Hakkar watched this, his tusked face twisted in disgust. He was appalled by the display. The Omegas were loud. They were emotional. They showed their weakness openly. "Pathetic," he snarled. "You cry for your weak. You have no strength. Only noise." He pointed a massive clawed finger at Alara, who was weeping as she tried to find a pulse on her father. "You!" he barked. The small, loud female. "You are a clerk. You will manage the others. You will ensure the first tithe of all refined minerals is on my ship within 3 days. My garrison will remain. They will teach you the meaning of dominance." He turned, his honor guard marching in lockstep behind him. He did not look back. He had broken their leader, established the hierarchy, and given his orders. In his mind, the war was already over. The Omegas had been put in their place. That night, in the colony's medical center, Ilara Vance sat beside her father, who was in a coma, his body shattered. The colony's chief medical officer, Dr. Eris, looked at her with grim eyes. "He's alive, Ilara, but he's broken." The impact shattered his spine and caused a massive cerebral hemorrhage. "It's a miracle he's breathing." Ilara looked down at her hands, still stained with her father's blood. The grief was a cold, solid weight in her chest. But beneath it, something else was kindling, a cold, quiet, patient fire. The Kragor had made their first mistake. They saw her, an administrator, a clerk, as a harmless tool for managing their new property. They saw her grief as weakness. They did not understand what she was truly. She was not a warrior. She was a manager, and she was about to manage their extinction. The Alphas had mistaken the human capacity for emotion for a lack of strength. They mistook the human ability to organize and build for a lack of a killer instinct. They saw a herd of prey. They failed to see the pack of wolves hiding beneath. The Kragor had just challenged a species that had spent 5,000 years perfecting the art of war, a species that had clawed its way to the top of its own savage food chain, not by being the strongest, but by being the most intelligent, the most cooperative, and the most utterly, creatively ruthless. The lesson was about to begin.